All right, welcome. This is our journal club for this week. I am Mike, a first year PhD student from TLab. I will be your host for today. Lipeng.
Hi, I am also, uh, I'm a research assistant from same lab. I'm Lipeng. Vishaal?
Hi, I'm Vishaal, and I'm a master student from the same lab as well.
And I'm Hormoz, and I'm an intern student at the same lab. Yeah.
All right, let's start. Today, the paper that we are going to talk about is Ganzfeld-induced hallucinatory experience, its phenomenology, and cerebral electrophysiology. Now, why are we choosing this paper and what is Ganzfeld? Well, first of all, my interest in this paper is really stemming from the hallucinatory experience that I've heard for people who stayed in darkness for an extended period of time. So previously, there seems to be case studies that suggest that if a person is isolated in darkness for a few days, they begin to see or experience these visual hallucinations. And I'm interested in knowing what sort of hallucination they are and whether we can induce them in a quicker fashion, which led me to this paper on the topic of Ganzfeld hallucination. What is Ganzfeld? Well, there are kind of different sort of Ganzfeld, but the most straightforward, typical example is uh, imagine seeing a completely have white in a completely white room, and the luminance is exactly the same in all directions. So that would be a typical example of Ganzfeld. There are other types. You can flicker it, you can do a completely dark one, you can change the color of it. But the point is, you have a uniform experience of a single luminance, a single color, so on and so forth. Now, why is it interesting? Why do people look into it in the first place? Well, it's sort of start from the studies in the Gestalt psychology, where the psychologists will begin to learn that structure is important to visual perceptions. So the question that Gansfield proposed is that what happens if there is no structure? And in this uniform luminance, there's essentially nothing there, but the stimuli still remains um, visible. You still have an experience, but there is essentially no structure. More experimentally, how this is normally done is by cutting up these ping pong ball and just glue them to your face essentially. Um, they are you do need to make some additional modification to them, but essentially the angle allows you to present an average luminance for the entire visual field of the participants. Um, Now, what sort of hallucinations do people experience when they are exposed to the Ganzfeld? It generally takes 15 to 20 minutes, I think. And the hallucination can actually be quite complex. I think in the paper they describe example of seeing a young woman riding a bicycle through the woods. Um, it's rather dreamlike in many aspects. Imagine you are dreaming, you wouldn't be surprised to see something similar. It also allows some deviation from logic and reality, and that's not a problem for Ganzfeld hallucination either. So there's a lot of similarities between dream and Ganzfeld hallucinations, and the author really want to know whether they are indeed as connected as they first seemed. Now, what did they do exactly? Well, they conducted EEG studies. Well, other people conducted EEG studies and they put it in their meta analysis. And they are focusing on the alpha frequency of the EEG data. Why alpha frequency specifically? I'm not entirely sure. It seems to have something to do with visual perception, with attention, and they did find a correlation between actual Ganzfeld hallucination and alpha frequency, so that's good. That seems to be the rationale here. But what's more interesting, I suppose, is that they found that the alpha wave, the peak of the alpha wave during Ganzfeld hallucination, is more similar to the waking state, comparing to this the sleeping state, which seemed to suggest a dissimilarity between Ganzfeld hallucination and more dream-related hallucinations. Another aspect is that they were thinking that maybe the Ganzfeld-induced global state may be contributing to this sort of hallucinations. What does that mean? Well, think about when you are imagine just watching a completely white field for 10 to 20 minutes, you will get very bored, right? Your vigilance will decrease, you will pay less attention. So maybe that has something to do with these hallucinations. So they compared the baseline Ganzfeld experience without hallucination and the Ganzfeld hallucination. And it seems in terms of these global states, it doesn't make a big difference whether you see the hallucination or don't see the hallucination. So while Ganzfeld does decrease your vigilance globally in your brain, it's not specifically the reason why the hallucination arise. So that's quite interesting. So these are the negative result in the sense that we are eliminating possibilities. So we know it's not dreamlike. We know it's not the global result of the global state. And they did actually find more positive evidence in terms of what spectrum characteristic that can sort of predict these hallucinations. What they found is maybe 30 milliseconds before the report of a hallucination, they see these alpha acceleration, meaning a shift from low frequency alpha bandwave to a high frequency alpha bandwave. Now that's quite interesting. Their explanation is related to the in the sense that high frequency alpha wave is a sign of the activation of thalamocortical system and the retrieval of memory, which sort of creates these dreamlike imageries. So that's their explanations. I'm not sure if it's convincing, but I guess we will talk about it later. The final chapter is related to telepathy and Ganzfeld. Why telepathy? It turns out that in parapsychology, Ganzfeld has been used as sort of a way to induce telepathy between individuals, apparently. The author is very critical of these studies. But other than that, that's about it. That concludes sort of the Ganzfeld hallucination paper. I haven't mentioned everything, so if you want to add anything, feel free, or we can have a discussion instead.
I think I can start with the first question. They talk about this EEG activity related to, I mean, the experiences, I mean, the percepts during Ganzfeld induced hallucinations, right? And then they talk about alpha activity, right? But are they, I've read and I was trying to find, but I couldn't really find the information. There's no, they don't talk about local activity, do they? Like which part of the brain are they actually measuring? When they talk about these frequencies, I assume that it's just global activity all around. So they don't really have like a discussion of what areas are implicated in this Ganzfeld hallucinations.
If you look at the section 5.6, I think,
Five,
they
6, yeah.
yeah, they do briefly try to pinpoint, in a sense, the source of the Ganzfeld-related activities. And they mention that it is quite different from the dream-related hallucinatory experience. But they
Uh,
didn't specifically say which area.
I mean,
So
in one case, I think specifically figure 5.3, 3, I believe, figure 3, they did mention that the recordings that they're showing is from the parietal region, right? The difference between wakeful state, Ganzfeld, and then sleep onset and sleep stages. In that one instant, they're comparing each of these states from epochs from the parietal region. But for the Ganzfeld hallucinations themselves, I don't think there's a discussion of which local region shows activity that it correlates to these hallucinations. Yeah. So that's one of the main questions. So are they? So the question that I have is, are they? I assume they're referring to global activity. Is that what it is? I'm not sure.
It seems like it, at least in most cases. They're using a 19-channel EEG. That's what
Yeah.
they mentioned. I'm not sure if that's the most sensitive version of it, given the improvement. Maybe you can tell us more whether their methods are sound in that sense.
I mean, different EEG studies like vary in their setup. Some use 19, some use 21. Nowadays there's this HD EEG, just use 256 channels, 128 channels. But I mean, this study is also from 2008. So I mean, I think 19 is not bad by any chance, right? As long as they get the data that they need and everything. Um, but yeah, I would have liked to see some, I guess, discussions of some hypothesized or suggested local activity that's correlated with the imagery of hallucinations that they're talking about. Yeah.
I would imagine since there's like visual, hallucinations involved, there would be like it'd be interesting to examine the occipital lobe, right? And maybe the parietal lobe, for the visual stuff. So yeah, those areas would be interesting. And like I was telling Mike, I actually finished up early, so I had the chance to like do some follow-ups. And apparently, this study has been only like, I mean, the effect itself has only been replicated 4 times since. So one is 2002, which is by the same author of this article. Then there was another one in 2006, and then there's nothing right up until 2008 and 2009. And very interestingly, the duration seems to go down. So the third time that they've tried it, it's went to 20 minutes to 30 minutes. It's 20 minutes and 30 seconds. And then the one in 2009 has decreased to 10 minutes. So I thought that's interesting. Majority of them have also used red light with one of them is the ping pong one. But another thing that was interesting in the study was like one of the distinction that says you can call sort of the effect could be more well categorized as pseudo hallucination as opposed to like real hallucination is that you're aware of the hallucination. Like you're aware that you're under the effect. And this reminded me of this is another very interesting phenomena that expands in hypnosis. Because in hypnosis, it's very super weird if you've ever experienced it. You know that you're under hypnosis, but you do whatever the hypnotist is telling you. It's kind of like it's kind of like your hand is like a Bluetooth device that's paired with the hypnosis, but you're completely aware. It's a super weird phenomenon. And yeah, that's a very interesting distinction because both would fall under altered states of consciousness. So I thought that bit was fascinating.
Oh, on that topic, actually, I was thinking about a link between the hypnosis experience and this Ganzfeld outer state of consciousness. So I think one thing in hypnosis, if my memory is correct, is the suggestibility of the person is very crucial to whether it's effective.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
And in this case, it also seems to be that some participants are really good at picking up Ganzfeld hallucinations, others are not. And in this
Precisely,
case,
yeah.
in this case, the personality correlate, if my memory is correct, is conscientiousness has a significant negative correlation with how frequently you can pick up these hallucinations, which is quite interesting, right?
Yeah.
Why conscientiousness exactly? Is it related to some
Mm.
sort of self-monitoring or other
Yeah.
characteristics?
Being aware. I was expecting something like openness to experience with playing a more important factor, but apparently, yeah, that one is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you talk about pick up the conscious experience, you mean verbally report or something else?
Sorry, what report are we?
Yeah.
So when you talk about pick up the conscious experience, do you mean that they catch the experience and they are able to verbally report there clearly in that sense, or there's another way to probe that they pick up this conscious experience? Because I notice in their paradigms they pre-train participant to report their internal state of conscious experience. So if you say they are better to pick up this conscious experience, do you mean that they have capability to verbally report or something else?
The intention was to say they. I guess the word encounter would be a better description. But that's a very good point because they don't really differentiate between reportability and what the participant actually experience, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
And there were three methods that they mentioned, and I guess I've highlighted it, but I don't seem to find it. But I was struggling to like understand what's the difference between the second one and the third one. As a I probably I'm sure I'll find it somewhere. But yeah, that's a very good question. The way the information is probed, and like there is actually a video on our own like labs YouTube channel, the mental imagery. So maybe I've talked about this before, but talking about, just like hypnosis and suggestibility, one of the main prominent factor is, uh, I might be phrasing this wrong, so don't take my word for it, but essentially the idea is some people can transform text to image much, much better. And apparently there's even a disorder where you can't do this. So for example, if somebody is reading a novel, right? They'll have a better ability to like imagine things as opposed to, if you have the I don't exactly, I believe the disorder is called aphantasia, where you can do that.
Yeah.
And
Definitely.
apparently the higher your mental imagery power is, the easier you'll be to, enter a hypnotic state. And I wonder if this also plays a factor with the consciousness and the negative correlation with the Ganzfeld effect. That would be actually interesting to monitor.
I actually have a question for Vishal as well. Does these alpha frequency seem similar or in the same pattern as the REM sleep dream EEG data?
So alpha activity is not really associated with dreams all that often. I mean, there are, I think, very few studies that highlight alpha activity in the frontal regions associated with dreamed content and stuff like that. But when it comes to dreams, primarily it's like delta activity, low frequency delta activity that's mostly related. Um, and also, I mean, sleep onset, you don't really get too much of like vivid dreams, which is what this paper is primarily referring to.
Yeah.
So I would say when they posted the figure that contrasted um the sleep onset patterns and the activity of like the Ganzfeld hallucinations and waking state, the difference, and then how they claimed that it may not actually be very similar. I would probably be in support of that kind of thing. Yeah. Um, but I'm not sure about the correlates of hypnagogic hallucinations. That's something I need to read up upon. I've not really read all that much about that. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite new to me as
Well,
well because never heard of these like just like sleep onset hallucinations. It's not
Mm.
like dreams, but it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite weird.
Yeah.
So how would we compare that to like lucid dreaming? Because in lucid dreaming, assuming like the person does get lucid, the imagery is quite vivid. That's one of the main reasons it's called lucid dreaming is because, you know, the imagery is vivid and you're completely aware of what's going on, right?
From the reading
So,
I've done so far, I mean, lucid dreaming is more associated with pretty much heightened activity in the frontal regions and those regions associated with like executive control, then I guess awareness and stuff like
right,
that. Um,
makes sense.
but again, as I brought up earlier, like this paper doesn't really mention too much of local activity. Um, so again, I would assume they're talking about a bit of a global activity when they talk about alpha activity and stuff like that. In one situation, in one instance, they did talk about very briefly a previous study that showed flicker frequency associated with like the strobe effects in the visual regions in I forgot one of the paragraphs, probably 4.1 when they talk about flickering Ganzfeld. But even then, it's just very, very briefly and not really, not that much of an in-depth thing. Uh, so yeah, it's hard to make comparisons when it comes to regions and neural correlates, because there's not much of a discussion, a specific detailed discussion on that in this paper. I think. Yeah.
Interesting. And the hypnagogic is, how do you pronounce it? Is hypnagogic imagery? Yes. So that's refuted as a thing that's happening in the effect by the paper, right? Like that was my impression that the paper suggests that might not be what's happening in the
Might
Ganzfeld
not
effect.
be. I mean, the evidence
Yeah.
suggests that it might not be. I mean, a hard no, a concrete refute is not. I'm not sure about that. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There was something else I also want to mention. Let me see if I can find it. Um,
While Hormoz is finding the topic, I I was just going to suggest that are we going to touch on the topic of telepathy or not? Should we discuss it, or should we just say, well, that's that, and ignore that section
No.
of the paper?
Up to you guys. I'm actually a little bit like that's how I came up on quantum consciousness. One of the venues was parapsychology because a friend of mine was super interested and, you know, couldn't stop talking. So, you know, I absorbed some of that, you know.
I mean, the experiment is kind of interesting, I guess, especially if you don't assume telepathy. Then there still need to be an explanation of why the rate is higher than the expected rate. Have anybody
Yeah.
read the methodology that they mentioned at the last section?
For
I am more interested.
which for parapsychology? Oh, no.
I'm more interested in how they reject the new hypotheses. Are they just reject new hypothesis? Doesn't mean the support of H1, right? So although
Yeah.
I didn't read the raw paper, but the original paper, but yeah, that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, I do agree. Telepathy isn't the first place that I would try to explain the result of their studies. Just for the reader's sake, should I quickly explain the structure of the experiment?
Yeah, please.
Go ahead, yeah.
Thank you.
Because
Yeah.
Gensel is highly tied to telepathy, so I think it's good.
So essentially, you have two person participating in the Ganzfeld studies. They glue the ping pong ball to their head, and one person will experience some sort of hallucination, while the second person will be tasked to focus and visualize on something, on I guess the hallucination of the other person, and then there will be description both from the person who had the hallucination and the person who tried to detect the hallucination. And an external judge would come in, they will look at the description, they will compare, contrast, and say whether the detector has successfully picked up on the signal sent by the sender, essentially. And I think their experiment found what the expected rate is 25%, the chance rate, and they found 32% hit rate.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's taken as an evidence that, the person is really picking up on the sender's message. So that's the setup.
Yeah, and a portion of the article is it's not I don't want to use the phrase implicit, but yeah, that's one of the reasons I think that the article refutes the idea that the Ganzfeld effect is actually something similar to sleep, because the argument in parapsychology is, because in parapsychology you have ESP, so they try to clump together clairvoyance, telepathy, and all the things. And as you know, traditionally in like spiritual sense, a lot of clairvoyance tends to happen in sleep. So one of the main arguments for telepathy in parapsychology was that, yeah, this is similar to like a dream state. And, obviously the ESP effect, like, includes all of those things. So yeah, Ganzfeld effect would, by order of the effect, would have to go in the direction, yeah, this is something of a sleep state. And I think this is why the article also makes a very, I would say, good attempt to say, no, this is very different to like a sleep state. And therefore, that takes away one of the parapsychological, I guess, arguments, yes.
Oh, I have a question, Mike, about this. Has anyone used a quantum entanglement to explain this phenomenon?
Yeah,
I don't
there's
know.
in the parapsychological literature, yes, they do use quantum entanglement to explain your telepathy, because they're like, if there's an effect without the, need of matter, so yeah, that would explain telepathy. But obviously, that is problematic. I don't want to. So yeah, that's yeah. It's a very controversial theory.
I would
of
imagine
science.
so. Yeah, I mean, quantum theory in general is quite controversial when applied to psychology, and we're adding the parapsychology elements into it, and just become a stew of controversy.
Yeah, I don't think it would be unfair to say like one of the reasons that people are I don't know what's the right phrase, like they're hesitant to like apply quantum stuff is because some of the negative reputation that in their mind like parapsychology is attributed to, because they use quantum stuff a lot.
On that topic, I would just extend it a bit further. So there is something interesting regarding the blank out state during the Ganzfeld exposure, and as well as the similarity to the mindfulness state in the meditations. So that's quite an interesting sort of link to draw between the two. But I also wonder whether it's just mind wandering, but in a more extreme form.
Well, I'm sure Vishaal can comment on this much better, but I believe one of the main traits for the alpha wave, specifically high frequency, if I'm not mistaken, is like in some cases connected to some sort of mindfulness state. And I don't know if it was in this article or maybe I've taken like a separate note, but focusing on imagery that sort of blinds your perception. So there's like ancient techniques of focusing on a candle to, meditate. Because usually in meditation, you focus on a specific thing to, obviously I'm talking about like mental image, to block out everything else. And that's how, you enter like the mindfulness states. The similarity is quite like there, but here I guess you sort of overload the sensory, you know, receptors, I suppose, is what you call it.
I do also wonder what would be the integrated information series take on
Exactly.
this kind of hallucination. Like I imagine the whether not sure how to phrase it, but of course, staring at the same thing for a long time, you have all these psychophysiological changes, adaptation, so on and so forth. But then these hallucinations seems to be far beyond the stimuli itself, right? But why do they occur in these instances, and why does it take 10 to maybe 15 minutes for them to occur? Why don't they just occur in like 1 minute or half a minute in? That's quite interesting to me.
So yeah, that is a very good question. And like I said, the latest, I guess this goes for 2022, so maybe there's been other instances, but the latest one with 2019, the control conditions were eyes closed in a dark room, changing shapes on a dark screen. I don't know the specific, but yeah, like I said, this one's duration was 10 minutes. So I'm super curious to know, what was the differences in hallucination. And apparently they've also used like EEG measurement. So again, I'm super curious to like Vishaal said, was there more, where the channels and the resolution was higher and stuff like that. And they've used again ping pong balls and qualitative self-reports. So very similar to this one. I was also wondering like whether there are any lingering effects. So, like imagine the simple tasks do, like for example, the other effect that like we're working on. Would there be any lingering effect if you immediately put them in front of the screen and do the like change try out the order effects or any other sort of simple tasks? Would the results be any different? Because this is a super like safe way to get people into like hallucinatory states, as opposed to like psychedelics and stuff like that. So again, this is why my mind was blown that I realized like there's been essentially 3 other replications after this study. It's insane.
That's a good question, right? I suppose the key thing that needs to be answered is how long does this altered state, or if it's altered state, how long does it last? Is it the moment when you remove the Ganzfeld and suddenly we snap back to the previous state? Or is there a continuum? It takes a while for the brain to readjust. Then maybe you would expect some sort of effect. But I'm not sure if the cognitive task, well, not completely, but I'm not sure if a cognitive task would be able to pick up these differences. I suspect they may be quite subtle if there is any.
Yeah. I'm definitely sure there's like lingering effect with like chemical altered states of consciousness, but with this one, probably not. Yeah.
And in addition to Mike's
I'm sorry.
Mike's comment, I also want to say maybe removing the ping pong from your eyes is a dramatic situation that is if you just open a hole at the ping pong, just a slightly difference, because this this phenomenon require for a very a smooth and a flat experience, I think. But if we just only need one slightly hole or ink on that wall or ping pong, maybe we can stop this kind of experience. Ganzfeld, I'm not sure. So compare with the removing whole ping pong, I think maybe this slightly change can also is promising.
Yeah, that would be
Detecting
interesting.
the threshold of Ganzfeld.
I remember I watched a video where it's like, now obviously it's like a YouTube video, so it's more like mostly for like entertainment purposes. It's like I think 15 minutes. I watched this a long time ago, and I remember instead of the ping pong thing, they tried paper light. Like it's paper, but it's not like normal paper. The color sort of comes through way more. And apparently that one was way more comfortable. But obviously, I think it's also mentioned in the paper, the degree, if you control the degree of the light going through, it might have an effect. I'm not sure if I'm remembering that or am I like relating it to the paper. But yeah, definitely it would be interesting if you mess around with that.
I think what something that actually caught my attention when it comes to this Ganzfeld hallucinations, something that I've personally also experienced. I'm pretty sure people have experienced quite a bit. Is when you try to fall asleep, you experience phosphenes, right? Have you guys ever? So like if, for example, you have like a pretty late sleep onset latency, pretty long sleep onset latency, and so you lie in bed with your eyes closed for an extended period of time, and that's considered a Ganzfeld type situation because technically it's completely dark and it's uniform like luminosity, right? And then after a while, you kind of have like flashes of lights. Have you guys experienced that before? So that kind of I have, and that kind of caught my attention. That I'm not sure if, but yeah. Again, I would like to see some actual like correlates. That's because I'm pretty curious here. So yeah, I don't know.
Maybe we could replicate one in lab because nobody seems to
Yeah,
have
yeah, we'll see.
maintained replication. Yeah, that would be interesting.
Maybe there's a slightly difference between between Ganzfeld and this pre-sleep experience in terms of the sensor in the section of sensory deprivation. So Ganzfeld, the sensory is unstructured, but the intensity of sensory input is really strong. But when we fall asleep, I think the sensory input is relatively weak. I think I want to point out
Yeah.
this.
And that was also mentioned in your article, right? So it was trying to correct the idea like yeah, this is not sensory depletion. Because again, so see, this is another like not so implicit, but a critique again levied at parapsychology. But because in parapsychology, what they presume is everybody has the ESP factor, but your normal senses sort of block it out. So again, one of the reasons that the Ganzfeld thing was like, yeah, this is sensory depletion. Why is that necessary? Because yeah, when you experience this thing, your ESP senses get activated. So again, the article makes a concise point that yeah, this is not sensory depletion. This is actually, if anything, it's sensory overload. So that is it's in the complete opposite of that, presumption. Exactly like you said, with sleep, it's more of a sensory depletion, but with this one, it's more like sensory overload. Yes is a better way of putting it.
I think that's actually an interesting point, right? Imagine the average luminance white Ganzfeld and a complete darkness Ganzfeld. Would they produce the same kind of hallucination at same frequency? I mean, if they do, then it's almost like saying that whether it's deprivation or overload in this case doesn't matter, as long as you have this unchanging experience, it's enough to make the brain fabricate its own imageries.
Precisely, yeah. I think that's one of the main theories for like meditation as well. It's not the like the there are different types of meditation, but essentially what they focus on is depleting your mind so you know you can go to more like spiritual places. But yeah, is your brain filling that gap or not? And you mentioned dark again in this latest study. That's why I guess we got to check this out after. I couldn't fetch the article, but yeah, so it's eyes closed in a dark room, so and changing shapes on a dark screen again. So this might be due to what you mentioned, which is might be they're going for sensory depletion as opposed to everything else, where they write down everything that they experience with when experiencing the light. So yeah, that is interesting. The sensory depletion. Yeah.
Any more questions or point of discussion?
I think that covers it on my end. So if anybody else wants to go, yeah.
Well, I think that's all of us then. It's quite an interesting paper. I actually also found a paper that's about they give a congenitally blind man hallucinogenic, psychedelics, and apparently
Wow.
there is some kind of visual hallucination that was experienced by this person. But we will talk about that in the future if we ever do that paper. All right.
Yeah. Can't wait.
I
Thank you.
think that's it. All right. See you next journal club then.
See you.
See you. Bye. 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 Bye.
Oh, stop.